Let me tell you something that most people get completely wrong about wealthy families. They think wealth is about what you do when things are going well. They focus on the bull market moves, the scaling plays, the acquisition strategies. But that is not where generational wealth is built or destroyed. Generational wealth lives and dies in the moments before the crisis hits, not during, before. And the families that have maintained wealth across centuries, the ones whose names appear in every industry, every country, every generation, they are not smarter than you. They are not luckier than you. They operate by a set of rules so old and so precise that most modern business consultants have never even heard of them. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with a man I will call Binyamin. Not his real name, but his situation was real. He ran a successful import business, 8 figures in annual revenue, 3 warehouses, a team of 40 people. And when the supply chain disruptions started hitting, he did exactly what every business podcast told him to do. He doubled down. He invested more capital into inventory. He told himself that the storm would pass. Within 14 months, he had lost 60% of his operating capital and was in negotiations with creditors. Meanwhile, his competitor, a family that had been in the same trade for 3 generations, walked through that same crisis and came out with market share they had never had before. The difference was not access to capital. The difference was a set of behaviors they refused to engage in when they saw the storm coming. Today, I am going to give you 5 of those behaviors. 5 things that wealthy Jewish families with generational money never do when a crisis is approaching. And every single one of these is rooted in Torah and Talmudic law, not as religion, as operating procedure, because that is exactly what it is. The first thing they never do is confuse activity with strategy. Here is what I see over and over again in business. When people sense a crisis coming, they start doing things, lots of things. They run more ads, they hire consultants, they launch new products, they restructure their pricing, they rebrand, they are in motion constantly, and they mistake that motion for progress. The Torah has a word for this kind of frantic, directionless action. In Proverbs, Mishlei 21:5, Solomon writes this: "The plans of the diligent lead to profit, but all haste leads to poverty." Read that again slowly. All haste leads to poverty, not some haste, all of it. Solomon, who was the wealthiest king in recorded history, and whose wisdom on commerce is documented extensively throughout the Tanakh, is telling you directly that speed without a plan is a poverty mechanism. The families I have studied, the ones that have maintained wealth through the Great Depression, through hyperinflation in post-war Europe, through multiple market crashes, they all share one behavior when they see turbulence on the horizon. They stop, they assess, they make a plan, and only then do they move. Not reactively, deliberately. Right now, your money is exposed. Inflation, market crashes, economic collapse. Most people lose everything when it hits. Jewish billionaire families never do. For 3,000 years, they've used one Torah system to protect and multiply wealth through every crisis. That system is now in one book. Link in the description and first pinned comment. Think about Joseph in Egypt. Bereshit, Genesis, chapters 41 through 47. Pharaoh has a dream that no one can interpret. 2 fat cows, 7 thin cows, 7 healthy grain stalks, 7 withered ones. Joseph does not just interpret the dream and collect his fee. He immediately proposes a 7-year economic strategy. He says, "Appoint a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action and appoint overseers. Let them collect 1/5 of the produce during the 7 good years." This is not a spiritual response. This is a crisis management playbook delivered before the crisis arrived. Joseph saw the pattern. He calculated the timeline, and he built a distribution and storage infrastructure while conditions were still favorable. That is why Egypt did not just survive the famine. Egypt profited from it. Every surrounding nation came to Joseph to buy grain. Egypt became the dominant economic power in the region, precisely because of a crisis that destroyed everyone else. That is what strategy before the storm looks like. Not panic, not motion, a plan. The second thing they never do is liquidate assets to fund lifestyle. This one is critical, and most people violate it without even knowing it. When cash flow starts to tighten, when revenue drops, when the economy contracts, the instinct for most people is to sell assets to maintain their standard of living. They sell stocks to keep paying their mortgage at the same level. They cash out retirement accounts to keep the lease on a car they do not need. They dissolve investment positions to fund a vacation they cannot afford. This is financial suicide, and it is one of the clearest markers that separates people who build generational wealth from people who never do. The Talmud in Tractate Bava Metzia discusses the concept of Yerusha, inheritance, and how a family's assets must be treated as a trust for future generations, not as a personal spending account for the current generation. The rabbinical understanding of stewardship is that you are never the ultimate owner of your wealth. You are the current manager of it, and a good manager does not cannibalize the business to fund his personal expenses. He cuts personal expenses to protect the business. This is not a moral statement. It is a structural rule. Let me tell you something most business coaches will never teach you. The moment you start selling income-producing assets to maintain lifestyle is the moment you begin the irreversible decline of your family's financial position, because lifestyle can be rebuilt. Compounding cannot be reversed. An asset that you sell today to pay for a vacation is not just the value of the asset. It is every dollar that asset would have generated for the next 20 years. And those dollars are gone forever. Every deal you've ever lost, every salary you didn't get, every contract that fell apart, happened because you didn't have this. For 3,000 years, Jewish billionaires have negotiated with 12 Talmud tactics that nobody taught you. I put every single one in one book, the Talmud Negotiation Bible. Link in the description and first pinned comment. Get it now. I have watched families in the Diamond District in New York, families that have been in the trade for 4 generations, face market downturns that would have destroyed most businesses. And without exception, the ones that survived were the ones that cut personal overhead immediately, protected their inventory positions, and did not touch their long-term capital. They drove older cars. They stopped eating at expensive restaurants. They kept their children in good schools, but cut everything else. Not because they were afraid, because they understood the math, because they had been taught from childhood that the asset base is sacred during a contraction. Do you know what that kind of discipline produces? It produces the ability to acquire at the bottom. When everyone else is selling to survive, the family that protected its capital is buying, and they are buying from the people who violated this exact rule. The third thing they never do is sever relationships when leverage is low. This is where I see entrepreneurs make catastrophic mistakes. When a crisis hits, when revenue drops and pressure goes up, people start cutting relationships. They ghost vendors they owe money to. They stop communicating with clients who are not spending. They distance themselves from partners who are not performing. They treat every relationship through the lens of its current transactional value. And they destroy the network they spent years building precisely when they will need it most. The Torah has a concept called imunat chavarim, faithfulness to companions, and it is treated with tremendous legal and moral weight throughout rabbinic literature. But I want to come at this from a completely business angle, because this is not about being a nice person. This is about network capital, which is the most durable form of capital that exists. Here is a direct reference from the Talmud, Tractate Avot, Pirkei Avot 4.1, which asks the question, who is wealthy? And the answer given is not the one with the most money. The answer is Ha-Sameach B'Chelko, the one who is satisfied with his portion. But the commercial application of this teaching in the rabbinic tradition is consistently interpreted to mean the one who has built relationships of mutual trust and reciprocity, because those relationships produce opportunity continuously while purely transactional connections dry up the moment the transaction ends. Let me give you a concrete example. In 2008, when the real estate market collapsed, there was a developer I know of who ran into serious liquidity problems. His projects were over-leveraged, and the financing dried up overnight. He had two choices. He could go quiet, stop returning calls, let his relationships with contractors, investors, and lenders deteriorate while he figured out his situation. Or he could do something counterintuitive. He called everyone. He was transparent about his situation. He renegotiated timelines. He made partial payments when he could not make full payments. He maintained the communication even when the news was bad. 3 years later, when the market recovered, every single one of those relationships was intact. And those relationships gave him first access to opportunities that other developers could not get, because those developers had burned their networks during the crisis. He came out of 2008 with more market position than he had going in, not because he was smarter about real estate, but because he understood that relationships are assets, and assets must be protected during a downturn. Are you managing your relationships like assets or like expenses? Because the answer to that question will determine your position on the other side of the next crisis. The fourth thing they never do is make permanent decisions based on temporary data. This one requires some intellectual discipline, and most people do not have it. When things get bad, the brain does something very predictable. It extrapolates the current trend indefinitely into the future. If revenue drops 30% this quarter, the brain tells you revenue will keep dropping. If a market contracts, the brain tells you it will contract forever. And from that distorted perception, people make decisions that are structurally permanent based on data that is, by definition, temporary. They sell real estate at the bottom of a cycle. They close businesses that were fundamentally sound but hit by external conditions. They take jobs they hate because they are afraid the opportunity they were building will never materialize. These decisions compound negatively for decades. This is not a new problem. This is a documented human tendency that the Torah addressed thousands of years ago. In the book of Numbers, Bamidbar chapter 13, Moses sends 12 spies into Canaan to assess the land. 10 of them come back with what appears to be data-driven analysis. The inhabitants are strong. The cities are fortified. We appear as grasshoppers in our own eyes. These are observations. These are facts about the current situation. And based on those facts, they recommend against proceeding. Their analysis is not wrong. Their data is accurate. Their mistake is that they interpret a current difficulty as a permanent impossibility. They fail to distinguish between a challenge that requires a better strategy and an insurmountable barrier that justifies retreat. And the consequence of that category error, of that failure to think beyond the current data point, is 40 years of wandering that was never necessary. Caleb and Joshua see the same land, the same fortified cities, the same large inhabitants, and they say something completely different. They say we are well able to overcome it, not because they are delusional, because they have a longer time horizon and a clearer understanding of what they are working with. They are not making a permanent decision based on temporary conditions. I want to be very direct with you about this, because it is the most expensive mistake I see entrepreneurs make. The crisis that feels permanent almost never is. The business contraction that feels like the end of your industry is almost always a cycle. And the families who maintain generational wealth know this, not because they are optimistic, but because they have studied enough history to know that conditions always change. Their job is not to predict when. Their job is to survive until it does, and to be positioned to benefit when it happens. This is why these families hold assets through contractions that make other investors panic sell. This is why they do not restructure fundamentally sound operations based on a bad quarter or even a bad year. They distinguish between what is broken and needs to change, and what is simply experiencing normal cyclical pressure. And they never close a position in a temporarily down asset unless they absolutely must. The fifth thing they never do is operate without a counsel, and this one might be the most important. Let me tell you something most business coaches will never teach you, and I mean this specifically because most business coaching culture is built around the idea of the lone entrepreneur, the self-made individual who builds something from nothing through sheer personal force of will. That narrative is appealing. It sells courses, it gets YouTube views, and it is functionally dangerous if you believe it completely. In the Jewish tradition, the concept of a council of advisors is not optional. It is legally mandated in serious decisions. The Sanhedrin, the ancient court of 71 judges, was not just a judicial body. It was the model for how consequential decisions should be made. The Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin is explicit about why a single person, regardless of their intelligence or experience, cannot be trusted to make the most important decisions alone. Not because they are not capable, because human judgment is systematically distorted by ego, by proximity to a problem, and by the emotional stakes involved when it is your own situation you are evaluating. You cannot see your own blind spots, by definition. And during a crisis, your blind spots will destroy you. The wealthiest families I have observed and worked with all share a specific structure. They have a formal advisory council that operates year-round, not just when things go wrong. This council includes people with different specializations, a legal mind, a financial analyst who does not have an emotional investment in the family's success, an older member who has lived through previous crises, and sometimes a trusted outsider who owes them nothing and can therefore tell them the truth. During a crisis, this council does not give comfort. It gives analysis. It asks hard questions. It argues. And from that friction, the decision that emerges is almost always better than what any single person would have produced alone. Abraham, the first patriarch, did not make major decisions in isolation. Before he went to rescue Lot in Genesis 14, he mobilized 318 trained men from his household, indicating a level of organizational infrastructure that goes far beyond a lone wanderer. He was operating a compound, a business entity, a protection network. He had people around him who were trained, trusted, and organized. That is not a spiritual metaphor. That is organizational design. Ask yourself right now, honestly, if a crisis hit your business or your finances in the next 90 days, who is your counsel? Do you have one? Is it formal? Do those people have access to your real numbers? Are they people who will tell you what you need to hear, or people who will tell you what you want to hear? Because there is a massive difference between the two, and that difference will determine whether you make good decisions under pressure or catastrophically bad ones. If you do not have a counsel right now, that is your most urgent business task, not a new marketing funnel, not a new product, not a rebrand, a counsel, a formal group of smart, honest people who know your situation and are committed to telling you the truth. This is not optional for people who want to maintain wealth across generations. It is foundational. Now let me pull all 5 of these together and give you the executive summary, because this is what I want you to remember. Wealthy families never confuse activity with strategy. They stop, they assess, and they build a plan before they move. Wealthy families never liquidate productive assets to fund lifestyle. They protect the capital base at all costs and cut personal overhead before they ever touch an income-producing asset. Wealthy families never sever relationships when leverage is low. They treat their network like the durable capital it is and maintain those relationships most aggressively when the relationship is least transactionally convenient. Wealthy families never make permanent decisions based on temporary data. They distinguish between what is broken and what is simply experiencing cyclical pressure, and they do not close sound positions based on a bad quarter. And wealthy families never operate without a counsel. They have formal advisory structures that provide honest analysis, not comfortable agreement, And they use those structures before a crisis, not only after one has already hit. Here is what I want you to do this week, not next month, this week. Take each one of these 5 behaviors and score yourself honestly from 1 to 10 on how well you are currently practicing it. Write down the scores. Do not lie to yourself. Then take your lowest score and make one specific structural change to address it. Not a mindset shift, a structural change. If your lowest score is on the council, schedule a meeting with 3 people who could serve that function and have an explicit conversation about what you need from them. If your lowest score is on lifestyle liquidation, review your personal expenses this week and identify what you would cut first if revenue dropped 40%. Do not wait for the crisis to run that analysis. Run it now while you can think clearly. The families that have wealth across generations are not waiting for things to get hard to figure out how they will respond. They have already decided. The decisions are made. The structures are in place. The behaviors are practiced in good times so that they are automatic in bad ones. That is not luck. That is a system, and it is a system that is available to anyone who is willing to study it and implement it with the same discipline that its designers did. The Torah is not just a holy book. It is the oldest, most tested business manual in human history. 3,000 years of applied economic wisdom across every possible crisis scenario, from famine to exile, to market collapse, to political persecution. The families that have used it as an operating system have maintained wealth through conditions that destroyed civilizations. And now you have 5 more pages of it. If this kind of direct, applied, Torah-based business wisdom is what you want more of, subscribe now. Not for inspiration, for strategy. Every video I put out gives you something you can implement in your business or your finances that week. That is the only content I am interested in making. I will see you in the next one.